The St. John's International Women's Film Festival is based in St. John's, Newfoundland and Labrador. We respectfully acknowledge the land on which we gather as the ancestral homelands of the Beothuk, whose culture has been lost forever and can never be recovered. We also acknowledge the island of Uktamguk, Newfoundland, as the unceded, traditional territory of the Beothuk and the Mi'kmaq. We acknowledge Labrador as the traditional and ancestral homelands of the Innu of Nitassinan, the Inuit of Nunatsiavut, and the Inuit of Nunatuavut. We recognize all First Peoples who were here before us, those who live with us now, and the 7 generations to come. As First People have done since time immemorial, we strive to be responsible stewards of the land and to respect the cultures, ceremonies, and traditions of all who call it home. As we open our hearts and minds to the past, we commit ourselves to working in a spirit of truth and reconciliation to make a better future for all.
Hi, everybody. Welcome to the St. John International Women's Film Festival. I'm Gloria Ouyang Kim, director, and I'm very, very pleased to be here moderating a panel about editing for film with 2 of my very favorite editors on the planet, Michelle Szemberg and Orlee Buium. And I have actually a really close relationship with St. John's International Women's Film Festival because my film, Queen of the Morning Calm, was the closing night film in 2021. And Michelle and Orlee actually edited that film for me. So thank you for being here. So I'm just going to introduce them and just tell you a little bit about them. Michelle Szemberg is a Toronto-born award-winning film editor who graduated from York University, and she worked as an assistant editor, which allowed her to be mentored by many of the leading forces in Canadian cinema. And her credits include independent feature films like Don't Get Killed in Alaska, No Stranger Than Love, Full Out, Kiss and Cry, and Natasha. And in recent years, Michelle's been known for her work in the Serendipity Point Films produced feature Below Her Mouth by director April Mullen, which premiered in TIFF in 2016, and Cuban-Canadian production Traductor with director Rodrigo and Sebastian Baruso, which premiered as part of the World Cinema Dramatic Competition at the Sundance Film Festival in 2018 and became Cuba's official entry to the 92nd Academy Awards in the category of Best International Film. In addition to her work in film, Michelle's edited 2 seasons of the Netflix Rogers TV series Between, created by Michael McGowan, and was the supervising editor on the Netflix CBC series Northern Rescue, produced by Don Carmody Television. And that's earned Michelle DGC and CCE awards for best editing in a family series. And she's most recently edited an episode of The Expanse, feature film Queen of the Morning Calm, which received a nomination at the DGC Awards for Best Editing in the feature film category. And Michelle is a passionate teacher and mentor, and she's been teaching actually at York University since 2020, and most recently won a DGC and CSA award for her work on Michael McGowan's latest feature film, On My Puny Sorrows. Orlee Buium is an editor with a passion for films with socially conscious content. She has many years of experience in the editorial department, including assisting on Kick-Ass 2, The Expanse, and the Broken Hearts Gallery. Her feature credits as an editor include All My Puny Sorrows, which again, she also won the DGC Editing Award and the CSA for dramatic editing, Queen of the Morning Calm, which was nominated for the DGC Award, The Retreat, which was on Showtime, and Run, Woman, Run. And most recently, Orlee locked picture on the television series High School, which premiered at TIFF this year. So I'm so happy and pleased to be doing this with you both. So I just wanted to start and ask you about your working relationship. How did you come to collaborate with each other? Orlee, do you want to maybe kick us off?
So I met Michelle in 2012. I was a student at York University and I took their internship course. My professor hooked me up with an interview with Michelle for Kick-Ass 2, which was Michelle's last hurrah as an assistant editor. And we just really hit it off at the end of that project, she asked if I wanted to come and join her on a low budget indie, a micro budget feature, which I believe was your first, right, Michelle?
My second.
Don't Get Killed in Alaska.
Yeah.
And she said, I'd love to take you on. I'll teach you whatever I knew if you could help me out with this. And we just, it's been 9 years now since then. we've just
10
really
years.
working together.
10 years. We just had our 10-year anniversary.
So
wow,
crazy.
that's amazing.
We should celebrate.
Absolutely. So, what I think is so interesting about editing is that like editors don't get any love on the red carpet, like even on shows like it's all production, and then the editing almost feels like an afterthought, even though it's not, absolutely not. I think we can all agree that editing is filmmaking as much as directing is. And I always say that an editor can make or break a film, they can make or break a director, they can make or break a performance. Do you guys have any comment on that? Like Michelle?
I think the editor's role is definitely understated. Like you said, it's a big part of the journey. So if you're shooting for, let's say, 25 days for a feature film, which is sort of average in Canada, you're in the editing room for 3-4 months, right? So it's a big part of a director's process. Yes, there's the writing, there's development, there's prep, there's shoot, and then you spend a long time. And a lot of films are definitely made in the editing room. You do have a script to work with, but there's such a journey from the script to getting to the your locked picture to the end. So I feel like it's a really creative place to be. It's a place to be that's a little different energy than being on set, which is really high pace, a lot of stress, where you can sort of take the time to sort of find your story and find your characters and cry over what you thought you would be making and what you ended up making, which happens all the time after directors watch assemblies.
Remember you called it, what was it? The bin of tears?
Yeah, that was
the
on
reject bin.
Yeah, so deleted scenes go into a bin of tears.
Yeah. But I was like, no, we'll call it the bin of joy.
And every film is a different journey, and it's a different dynamic with different people that you're working with. So even though sort of we try to follow a certain workflow, every project has new parameters, new challenges, different outcomes. So it's very exciting, I feel like. And I feel like directors love being in the editing room after they cry.
Yeah.
When they watch their first cut.
It's true. It's like it's very cathartic, right? After like the craziness of production. Orlee, do you have anything you'd like to add to that?
Well, I think they really talk about the edit suite as being the third rewrite of the script, right? There's the original script, and then what you actually get in the can on set, and then you come into the edit suite and you have the power to really make so much happen with what they got and like potentially what they can still get. So I think there really just is so much room to play and have fun, and just so important not to get caught up in like one thing, right? Because as soon as you kind of put a box around yourself, you're closing yourself off to so many other opportunities within the same footage.
Yeah, I totally agree. It's interesting for me. I mean, as a director, I'm just going to interject and talk about working with you guys, if I may. But like, what's interesting for me is like when you have an editor that you really trust, right? That that like, and I know I just met you on my project on my feature, but I immediately felt like I could trust you both. I felt like I was in such good hands. And you just, even from the first assembly, I felt like, wow, I have big trust in these two editors. They're incredible. But as a director and a writer, because I wrote the feature as well, you have something in mind. And then what I love is when an editor will take the footage and cut what they see, right? Because it doesn't always work what you think that you're going to get. And you're just like, oh, it actually doesn't work like that, but you've done something completely different that I love, right? So I like that, just not putting yourself in the box.
Can I add to that?
Please.
I think every director too, it's really important when you start a project, because every director works differently. Some, and it also depends if you have a relationship with the director or not. I feel a lot more confidence to make decisions when I have a relationship with the director and they know how I work. It allows for you to think outside the box a little bit more, to try things, to take some risks. Whereas when you're working with a director for the first time, you're not sure what they expect. So you're a little bit more, you're unsure, and you try to cut sometimes a little more to script, for your assembly. But for example, in All My Puny Sorrows, Michael McGowan, I had known for almost 20 years. So we had a great relationship. Orlee had known him as well. And he said, if you cut to script, I'll be really upset. He wanted to see what we could do. He's like, do not cut to script. Whereas I think there's other directors, depending on their level of experience and confidence as well, won't say that to their editor. They want to see what's on the page, right? So you really have to gauge depending on who you're working with. And I find a conversation before you start a project really important, to say, hey, what are you expecting? So communication is key between an editor and a director in this sort of sense.
Yeah.
If I could just add on to that, I think, so Michelle and I obviously we didn't know Gloria before we started her film. But it was one of my first features. And I remember I was cutting together my assemblies, and I was like, I want Gloria to see everything that she did. And I wasn't confident really making those decisions. I was leaving the beginning and end of the scene really long. And one of the first things Michelle said to me, and of course, Michelle is so much more experienced than I do, was you have to make some decisions. You can still give her the script without giving her every piece of footage that she shot, so like come up with creative ways to enter and exit scenes, and, don't let them walk out of camera every single time that they leave a room. So I think there's, even if you are cutting to script, there is still decisions that can be made to create a compelling director's cut or editor's cut to show the director.
Yeah.
And can we talk just a little bit? I think this is a good time to talk a little bit about how we started co-editing, because it was on your film.
Yeah. Oh, really? I didn't know that. I thought you had co-edited before together.
No, Orlee had been my assistant for, I think, 6 years. So we had worked together. And she was sort of an associate editor on Un Tractor, so she had cut scenes. So to follow up with Orlee of how we met, she came and worked with me. I trained her. She became a better assistant than I ever was, and she was like my right hand. So I believe in mentorship and training assistants and letting them be part of the creative process. So she was always really part of the creative process, whether it was giving notes, doing sound work, helping to assemble scenes. We would look at giving me feedback, even sitting with directors and stuff. So we just became really comfortable. We organized, we cut the same in some, it was the synchronicity between us was so great that it just became really natural. I'm not sure that we could co-edit with just anybody. It's the fact that we have this relationship built. But it's really interesting because a lot of editors have said to me, I don't know how you did that, and maybe, Orlee, you want to talk about our workflow of how we did sort of Queen and All My Puny Sorrows and how we sort of broke it up and how we, because I think it's interesting.
Yeah, well, we definitely did totally different approaches, I think, to the first one and the second one, mostly because on Queen of the Morning Calm, we had all of the footage when we started, and on All My Puny Sorrows, we were on as they were shooting. But actually, no, in both cases, I think one of us was like, for the most part, cutting the first half, and for the most part, cutting the second half. On Queen of the Morning Calm, that was so easy because it was like, all right, here's the first half of the movie and here's the second half of the movie, because we had pretty much everything from the lab processing everything at the same time. But on All My Puny Sorrows, we would look at the call sheet every day, and we would just split it up. And if there was like chunks, like, oh, I cut scene 65 yesterday, I'm going to cut scene 66 today that we just got, or I don't think it was like intentional that we ended up with me more assembling the first half and you doing more of the second half. But it really just kind of was what happened. But it was so interesting. After we did the assembly, the two of us came together, and we would look at each other's edits and give each other feedback. And it's just so, like, you think that you've gotten all of the beats, and then the other person comes in, they're like, I have this idea. Oh, that edit's not working because of this. But just looking at somebody else, like each other's work, we're like, it's so clear what you need to do, and I have no idea what to do in my scenes.
Yeah, it's really interesting because we almost, as co-editors, could like sit in the director's seat for each other's scenes, which was an interesting experience.
That's
and we
amazing.
could, yeah, and it's funny how sometimes you get really stuck when you're assembling your own scene, and it's so much easier to have somebody else take a fresh look at it and say, hey, why don't you try that? And I'm like, oh, why didn't I think of that? That's such a simple,
and it's
solution.
So obvious after.
It's so obvious, but when you're stuck in it, it's such a different process. So yeah, that was great. And then when we started working with the director, we kind of jumped on and off the Avid depending on whose scene was assembled. I don't know if you remember, Gloria, we kind of did that. So this is Orlee's scene. Okay, you go on and work on it. And then the other person would sit in the back, or if it was on Gloria's film, part of the time I had just had a baby, so I was like sitting in the back seat, and Orlee was driving the Avid, and I was breastfeeding and giving notes.
Yeah, I remember that was so, I'm gonna say that was so fun. That was like, and your son was so perfect. He was so perfect.
But it's funny, like, I feel like it wasn't even hard. Like, it just felt so natural for us to do that.
Yeah.
And even like, I remember finishing both films and being like, how am I going to edit a film by myself? Like, I won't have, Michelle here with
collaborator
me giving that like reinforcement on my edits.
Yeah.
That being said, I feel like there was so many just like little details of feedback that we gave each other that really like clicked. And when I did do features by myself, I was like, I've taken so much. I mean, I think editing Queen of the Morning Calm with Michelle, I always referred to as like a master class in editing, where I was like, every single one of my edits is being like looked at, analyzed, and like I had to think so much about my decisions.
Wow.
And I think you would agree that All My Puny Sorrows was like such a different experience, where we were co-editing Queen of the Morning Calm, but it was more of a mentorship position. And then All My Puny Sorrows, I think we were there much closer to equals, even though Michelle has so much more experience than I do.
Yeah, definitely. And we both have different strengths in some ways, which is great because we feed off each other. We always sort of, I'm a little older than Orlee, and I find I find the millennial generation tends to think more, which can be great. And I come from like a school of feeling more and sometimes not thinking enough. So it's like we always tell each other, like, yeah, because like for me, when I watch dailies, and I assemble, I try not to think too much. I feel like it's really intuitive. It's really this, and sometimes I miss things because I don't think enough. Whereas I think Orlee tends to think a lot about things. She really connects things and story and characters and arc and all of this stuff. And sometimes I say, well, just try to connect emotionally a little bit more and feel. So the combination of the two of us, we found now this balance I find great, because she influences me to think a little bit more and I influence her to feel a little bit more, and then
That's so interesting,
we find this
right?
balance. Yeah.
Yeah. So like that leads to a question that I have about like process and intuition versus like, I guess maybe more technical experience, and like that balance between intuition and the technical, like, because definitely with directing, there has to be a balance between intuition and technical. And like, I know that as a director, I am much more of a feeling director. Like, I love using my intuition first, and then I like to break things down and think things through, kind of thing, right? But in terms of editing, like, can you tell me, like, in terms of like what you think the balance might be between those two and how you balance the two? I don't know if that's something that
Yeah,
you thought
I mean,
about.
I feel like the way I could break it down for myself, and Orlee can add afterwards, is that when I'm first watching dailies and I'm assembling, I try to just feel as much as possible, and you only get a first impression once. You only get to see the performance for the first time once. So I really try to just hone in on that. And I kind of say, when I'm doing my first assembly, I'm kind of throwing up on a timeline. I'm cutting faster, because I find with sort of the way my brain works, if I try to sort of make things perfect on the first round, I get stuck and I lose that sort of momentum of feeling. And then I feel like when you get in the room with the director and, later passes, that's when you can start sort of talking a little bit more technical, a little more, story and connection, and what I call thinking things through a little bit more. So I feel like if you start a little bit more intuitively, you're going to get those moments. And then later you can sort of bring another side of your brain to the process. That's kind of how I work. I need, like, for my, like, a lot of people can cut on their first rough cut or their first assembly and make it really fine. Whereas I find I need 2 passes, because otherwise I lose that sort of that rawness that I would cut on the first pass. And sometimes it's pretty incredible how so many of our assemblies, even if sometimes they can stay true throughout the pass if you really sort of connect.
That's so interesting. What about you, Orlee?
I think it's funny because I feel like, though I am more of a technical editor than Michelle, I think both of us still kind of like lean on the side of being emotional editors. Like, neither of us are really people whose first gut will be to bring in like visual effects options. I think we're both always people who are trying to find the connections in the performances and what's on screen. So I feel like once I start thinking about all of those options, I'm like, it's too much. Like, I really need to stick to what's here. But for me, when I'm assembling film scenes, I do like to sit and watch all of the footage, and as I'm watching stuff, really let like the scene form in my brain, so that by the time I get to the assembly, it's like I know exactly what I want to do. I want to be on that for the close-up. I want to be in this. So usually, like, my initial like cut I've done is very quick. Like, I can do like a 2-minute scene in like half an hour or something. I mean, it won't be necessarily amazing, but because of the way my brain's been processing as I watch the footage, I kind of get there. I don't think everybody is always into like watching all of the dailies first, because it can definitely be a big time suck. And when you're working in TV or something, like, you really just might not have the time to kind of go through that process. But for me, sometimes I'm a bit lost if I don't do it. Or like when I'm coming back with the director in the room, I feel like I don't have as strong a grasp on the footage.
Right. So do you guys want to talk? Oh, sorry, go ahead, Michelle.
No, I just wanted to add to that, because it's interesting, because everybody's brain is wired differently. And for me, watching all the dailies all at once sometimes is a little overwhelming, and I can't retain it. So I don't have the same visual memory, especially after having 2 kids. My brain has lost a little bit of my memory. And I find that I need to sort of break down scenes sometimes and watch everything as I'm cutting, rather than, watching everything and then formulating it first. So, you know, it really depends. And also, this is another thing, every film and television show is different. And sometimes your workflow changes depending on the amount of footage, depending on the type of show, film. So it's like you kind of, you know, do things differently depending on what you're working with.
Okay. Well, I was going to ask you about your workflow and how when you start a project, what your first steps are. Do you think you can maybe generally talk about this? Yeah, like Orlee, do you want to start this one off for us?
I mean, how far back are we going?
I mean, as far back as you'd like to go.
I mean, both of us really prefer to have an assistant editor who's taking the lead on organizing all of the like technical stuff with the lab and with production and really taking the lead so that by the time we get the footage, we can really just concentrate on story and the cut and performances. And, you know, if they're shooting, then making sure that we're up to date so that if there's anything that we want to ask production about or flag to production, you know, our head is entirely in that.
That's fair.
I feel like the dailies workflow both of us kind of just talked about in the last question, so I'm not totally sure what else to say with that.
Yeah, no, that's fair. Yeah, no, that's interesting, right? Because when you put together your cut, that first assembly, like how do you approach the director's like circle takes?
I'll take this. I mean, you take it with a grain of salt because you also don't know, you know, what a director sees on set. It, you know, once you're cutting it together, it may not be the right fit for where you're going with stuff. So it's really important. I think for our assemblies, I always try to read the notes and what the director liked. But also if they say, oh yeah, that was the best take, but there's, you know, 10 seconds at the beginning that was great in another, you know, take, you still have to watch everything and you still have to sort of make those decisions. But, you know, you try to find the moments in the takes that they like. But again, once the director's in the room, you rip apart everything and you watch everything again. And sometimes, you know, as you go through cuts and cuts, you keep going back and you keep finding things that you didn't see as the cut evolves, right? You know, Gloria, we're always going back. Let's look at that scene again. Let's see if we can find a different, and as you're getting notes and feedback on characters, like, you know, someone says this character is not likable. We have to go back and find smiles or find moments or find things that you didn't even realize you needed until you sort of got some feedback.
Yeah. I remember like just in working with you both on I remember two particular scenes that we worked on that I remember thinking, you know, in one of the intro scenes where we first meet our main character, Deborah, and her relationship with her daughter, I remember you presented me with her character, and she was a little sterner, more cool toward the daughter. And I was like, I don't know about this. And then I showed it to a couple of people, like a couple of moms actually, who were like, we don't like her. And I was like, oh, that's so interesting. I remember we had to go back and like warm her up. And I was just like, I know we have it in this footage. Like, let's try and figure out, because it's like, she's such a tough character, right? Like she's such a like just to contextualize for those watching, she's a sex worker who is struggling to basically take care of her daughter and still try to maintain a relationship with this the addict father, who's kind of like, you know, like a ne'er-do-well. But I remember doing that with you, and then I remember doing that other scene where the father comes home for the first time, and she's just been fired essentially, and they're having this like what it feels like a very serious talk, and then the daughter comes in, and the daughter is like kind of takes over the conversation, and I remember her like, it was cut to script, but I remember saying to you guys, yes, but there's this like element of like where the mom is a little jealous of the daughter. Can we add that in? And that was really fun to do, right? Because that was like something that you guys maybe weren't thinking about, and that wasn't necessarily like what I had written into the script. It was just like part of the performance that I had asked for, because it was like part of the subtext, and I just remember thinking, wow, that was a lot of fun to do.
Yeah, and another, thing that's really interesting too is, everybody perceives the script differently and the characters differently, and everybody has sort of different perspectives as you're cutting. And sometimes as editors, I find we can get stuck on what we sort of love and like. And, working with you was a great experience in the sense where sometimes we would say, this isn't going to work, and you would push us to keep trying, And sometimes it was really challenging to make what you wanted work. But that was the beauty of, your vision and stuff, is that you kept pushing us. And then sometimes we would get it and we'd be like, wow. And I've said this over and over again, you never, ever should say no. That won't work to a director, because then you might be made to look a fool when she pushes you and makes it work. So I've sort of really over experience learned, it's worth it to try things, because even if that thing that you're trying doesn't work, it can lead you to the thing that does. So I find I've heard stories of editors really sort of being like, defiant and creating a bit of tension in the cutting room when they say, no, I don't think that'll work. That won't work. And they won't even take the time to try it. And sometimes it doesn't work. But I think earning the trust of the director is so important. And the way you do that is by being open and willing to try things, even if it takes you an extra hour that sort of goes nowhere, having that attitude that you guys are a team and that you're, willing to just, go down dead ends sometimes. It doesn't matter, because those dead ends sometimes, lead you to, finding the right way out. So it's all
co-storytelling.
Part of the process.
Co-storytelling. Orlee, did you have anything you wanted to add to that?
I feel like Michelle explained that so well. But I've definitely, I think to myself sometimes, if there was another editor who would take this on, would they say no also, and if the answer might not be that, then I need to think more. And I think that comes back to the box that I was talking about before. And I think just because something works one way doesn't mean it won't work another way as well. And I think sometimes we become so we feel so much ownership over the project as an editor. And I think you need to, in order to, be producing your best work. But at the end of the day, the directors and the producers that you're working with have been with this material for so long, and they have a vision that they went to camera with. And I think as the editor, we're really there to help them tell their story the best. So even if it doesn't necessarily match our sensibilities, I think really getting into your creatives' heads and seeing what they're trying to do is very important. And how many times you do something and you're like, oh, I really hate it, and the other people are like, oh, we love it, and you're like, okay, and then 2 weeks later they're like, I was thinking about that original version you did, and I think it's not better this way, and I think if something is meant to happen, it always comes back.
Yeah, that's something I learned that early on is, sometimes we push for things, but sometimes it's better to sort of let go and trust that if it's meant to come out, it comes out. And, sometimes on the sort of second from last pass, I'll say, remember, I'm still bumping on this, and, I'll try. And sometimes someone will mention it when they, when you show it to people, it'll come up in notes, and then the director might be more open to looking at it. There's a process for a director to let go of things as well. And if you push too much in the beginning, they can get defensive, and there can be so it's really creating an energy in the cutting room that is positive and joyful in a way, so that a director feels comfortable trusting to do things, that they may not want to do, because you've been planning this, and you've been working on this for so long, and then
years.
things don't go Yeah, and it doesn't go as expected, and it's hard, you know. And I always say that an editing room is also, you know, like a therapy room, right? So you're
100%.
having to wear different hats a lot as an editor. You're working
Yeah.
with a lot of different personalities. You need to adapt because every personality is different. So the way you would work on one project versus another could be different, because you have to be able to read the room and know how to create this sort of, like, for me, it's really important to have this creative, positive energy in a cutting room. So you have to know how to handle that, because you're working with a lot of different personalities that can sometimes be challenging.
Yeah, and if I may just say this, what I think you both have as editors and what makes you such excellent editors, beyond the technical and beyond the fact that you feel the story, is that you're also both so good in the room. Like, you're both, like, I felt like making this film Queen with you guys, and it was my first feature, very personal story. I just felt like so safe. I felt like so embraced and so welcomed, and like you guys really were open to hearing all of my thoughts and my vision, and just went the extra mile to make things work for me. And then, but we're also really honest about what was working and what wasn't working, right? So to me, that was a very, very special experience, and what I think makes you both so extraordinary. And I just
That's so
needed to say
nice.
that. Yeah.
I think to add on to, it's really important to not just be, and I know Orlee talks about this, that she really doesn't like being this person, is sort of a yes woman, where it's like you're a button pusher. It's really important to be able to sort of be part, like
Yes.
a creative collaborator, not just someone who says yes to everything. If there's something, and I think directors respect that, because when you do put your foot down a little bit and say, hey, I really don't think this is working, and you've earned the director's trust, they listen, you know, because again, what Orlee said of, you know, our job is to sort of craft the director's vision in the end. So I remember used to saying to you, when we would disagree on something, I'd say, but this is your film and I trust you. So if you really feel strongly about it, I trust you, you know, in your decision, Gloria. But I would still try to, you know, state my piece, and then, but
Which
in
I
a very
respected.
in a very safe way, so that the room, you know, and again, things are subjective in film, right? So there's no one right way to do something, right?
Yeah.
And I'm
Yeah.
always
sensibility.
curious, like, is there something that's interesting in the dissonance between the two people's perspective, you know, or the director really wants it this way and the editor really doesn't agree on it? Like, is there actually something that's like kind of magic between the two of them that will like address both people's perspectives and like maybe reach out in a more complex way, or like make a more complex final scene?
Yeah. So I got the notice of, like, we only had a few minutes left, and that was a few minutes ago. So I think I should ask maybe just one last question about any advice that you have for those of people watching who want to get into editing.
Michelle, you want to go first?
You want me to go first? Okay.
I need a minute.
So she always passes it to me. Well, you know, I've started in the last few years. I've done a lot of mentorship at the Canadian Film Centre. Started teaching at the film school at York University, and I deal with this a lot with sort of, you know, recent graduates, and they're all, you know, coming to me afterwards. So what do I do now that I finished film school? So I feel like it's a really challenging thing to sort of get your foot in the door, and it depends where you're located, I think, because I mean, I can only speak for sort of Toronto and Ontario. It depends, you know, I think you need clarity on what you want to do. There's different paths you can take. Are you interested in documentary editing? Are you interested in lifestyle? Are you interested in, you know, dramatic television and film, which is what we do? And, you know, there's a union that we belong to. So the first sort of goal is to get into that union, which is sort of get the information, and sort of figure out what you need to sort of get your days and to be able to get in there. But there's a huge networking component, you know, and you need to meet people. So the thing I tell my students always, if you don't know Canadian film, start learning about Canadian film and who's who. Do rabbit hole dives on the internet and IMDb of, you know, the last 10 years of TIFF Top 10, CSA Best Editing nominations, start watching the films, learning about the directors, the DPs, the editors, the assistants, start learning people's names, you know, and then once you have sort of make a list of the people that you want to meet that, you know, are potential people you can work for in the future, and, you know, start emailing, try to set up Zoom calls or coffee things. So you need to sort of get that network to sort of get your foot in the door. You know, that's sort of the starting point. And then, you know, you also need a certain skill set of, you don't need to know how to use every sort of software. I mean, it's important to be technical, but there's a sort of a skill of being able to sort of learn fast, problem solve, have a great attitude. Those are the kind of things we look for when we're sort of hiring people. But that first sort of getting in the door and getting sort of people that you can learn from is the key to getting trained. And once you're trained, the industry is incredibly busy right now. So if you have the training and the experience and the confidence, you're going to get work, you know, but it's that beginning part that seems to be so challenging.
Yeah,
And
that's interesting.
Orlee, you want to add on to that?
That was such a good answer.
No, thank you.
I think the only thing I would really add to that is there is a difference between a yes person and a button pusher.
Yes.
And I think when people are starting out, we really love button push. We really love yes people. You know, but also, you know, like people who like have an opinion. You know, if you're here because you love movies and you want to work in movies, like it's definitely a hard industry. I mean, I hope that there's a little bit of change coming with a little bit more work-life balance. But it is definitely an industry that can take a lot out of you. So make sure that you're doing something you really like, be it like people you're interested in working with, projects you're interested in working on, you know, make sure you're not just taking a project because it's there, like make sure it's something that you're excited about doing for one reason or another.
Yeah,
I think both of us have always made choices in our careers, and I think early on with Orlee, I always sort of stressed that it's more important to pick projects based on who you're working with and the stories you're telling than for money. I mean, not everybody feels the same way, but that's sort of how I've strategized my career, and I think Orlee is doing something similar. I mean, it's nice to work on projects with people that you respect and make money, but it you know, our priorities have always tended to sort of focus on the types of stories to tell and the people we're working on.
Yeah. And sometimes, I mean, you know, not everybody always has the ability to not take work for money. But I think once you feel like you can make those choices, then just know that there is a lot of opportunity. I think the hardest projects I've worked on are ones that I really don't want to do, you know, like ones that I love working on. Like every week goes by so quickly, you know, and I'm excited, I wake up excited to go to work. But sometimes when I'm not excited about a project and I kind of knew that going in, it's like it really does drag, and then your energy kind of feeds off of it too. Where even if it's only a week, well, then every extra couple days or like 2 weeks later when they're asking for something and you're like, oh, really? You know, like you don't want to put yourself into those situations.
Yeah. Well, I mean, I feel like you both have made really great choices, and I certainly think you're getting that feedback from the industry, and just with all the awards and the nominations that you guys keep getting every single year, it's like, yes, Orlee and Michelle, another award.
I think we're excited.
Yeah.
We feel grateful and shocked every time something happens.
And it's nice because, now Orlee's doing a lot of solo stuff, and I'm, I've had 2 kids, and I'm planning into going back to work eventually at some point to find that work-life balance. But I'm hopeful that Orlee and I can continue doing this every once in a while when the right project comes up, because I think it's a really special dynamic. And I think it's interesting for directors too to have 2 voices in the cutting room.
Yeah, it was really, for me, it was really special. I really, really enjoyed it. I just thought you guys were both incredible, and you both had such like interesting solutions to problems, and just did such amazing stuff with my footage that I wasn't expecting, that just made the film better. So yeah, thank you both for your time today.
So nice to chat with you, Gloria.
Yeah, so nice to catch up. I'm so pleased with your successes, and thank you to the St. John International Women's Film Festival for having us today.